Today, we are going to discuss surveys for feedback and understanding. Together, we'll walk through how to create a survey on Brightspace, as well as how to view your survey results. Let's start by talking about what options we have with Brightspace surveys. If you've used a different online survey tool in the past, you'll find that Brightspace has similar options. You can choose to make your survey anonymous or identified based on whatever your survey purpose is. Similarly, you can set up your survey using a variety of different question types, like multiple choice, written response, fill in the blank, matching, ordering, and a Likert scale. Within those question options, you may get additional settings as well, so you can adjust things based on your needs. I mentioned other online survey tools, so let's talk about why we might choose a Brightspace survey over something else, like a Google form or a Microsoft form. One benefit of the Brightspace survey tool is that it keeps everything in Brightspace. This means your students don't need to leave your course in order to take your survey. It also makes it much easier to copy the survey between course offerings. If you were to use a Google or Microsoft form, you would need to update the survey link. Otherwise, all of your responses would go to the same place from semester to semester, which is probably not what you want. Keeping the content within Brightspace also helps to avoid permissions issues. For example, if you have a department chair in your course and you want that person to be able to view your survey, you won't need to worry about adding them as a collaborator on a survey hosted by an outside tool. Similarly, students won't need to complete additional sign-ins if you want them to complete an identified survey. Surveys are best for getting feedback data from students. You can view their responses individually, or you can view an easy-to-read summary of all of the data. This information can be shared with students, but a survey is best if it's for you, the instructor. If you do want students to interact and collaborate, you may consider a discussion instead. For example, if you're doing an icebreaker at the beginning of a course, you could ask questions via a survey, but a discussion would allow students to read and respond to each other's responses. There's also a Brightspace tool called self-assessment. This tool is similar to a survey in that it can't be scored or added to the gradebook. The difference, though, is that a self-assessment is just for students. The instructor can't see the results of these or provide feedback. The only way to provide feedback is to write automated feedback ahead of time. Let's walk through how to create a survey on Brightspace. To get to your surveys, you want to go to Activities and then Surveys. To create a survey, select New Survey. Here, you'll start by giving your survey a name. Category is for you in case you want to categorize your surveys. For example, maybe you have a category of surveys for end-of-unit assessments and a category of surveys for icebreakers and getting to know you activities. The checkbox to give instant feedback will have feedback appear automatically on questions if you have written it in advance. So for example, if you have a multiple choice question where you ask students, what was the most challenging part of this unit? And one of the options is time management. When a student selects that option, your automatic feedback would pop up saying, I see you're having trouble with time management. Here are some resources to help you. Here, this checkbox will make results anonymous if you so choose. What is important about this is that once you choose to make a survey anonymous, you cannot undo that choice. And that's to keep all of us honest, right? We don't want to tell students that a survey is anonymous, then uncheck the box and we can see who is saying what. The other important thing about anonymous surveys is that if you choose to make a survey anonymous, you cannot add release conditions. If you were to add release conditions to a survey, you would be able to reverse engineer who said what, and that's not something we want. We're going to come back to adding and editing survey questions in a minute. I'll go through all the settings first. Here you have the option to add a description. If you want to do that, that description would appear at the top of the survey and would stay there. You can also add a custom submission message. If you don't want to do a custom message, students are going to see this when they submit. You have successfully submitted the survey. Finally, there's an option to add a footer that could appear at the bottom of your survey if you want. And with all of these things, you have access to the full Brightspace HTML editor. So you can add quick links or embed videos or whatever else you feel would be helpful to students. Back at the top, there's an option for restrictions. So something that's important to note is by default, there will be a check mark that hides the survey from users. You can absolutely unhide it, but just know that if you don't go in and uncheck this, when you save and finish your survey, it will be automatically hidden. Just like anywhere else on Brightspace, you can add availability dates and release conditions if you don't want everyone to see the survey all at one time. What's probably most important here is user responses, and this will limit how many times students are able to take the survey and whether or not they can edit their responses. The default is unlimited, so that means students can take the survey as many times as they want, and each attempt is going to be recorded separately. So one person takes it 4 times, you see 4 separate attempts. The next option is to provide a single attempt that is editable. That means each student can only take the survey once, but they can go back into that attempt and change their responses if they'd like. What's important here is that if a student takes a survey, submits it, and then reopens it to edit it, you will not be able to see their attempt unless they hit submit again. The last option is limited, where you specify the number of times students are able to take the survey, and whatever that number is recorded separately. So if you only want students to be able to take it once and not edit that attempt, you would choose limited and choose 1 as your option. So I'm going to go back and we're going to add some survey questions. Here I'll select add and edit questions. And you'll see up at the top the option to add a new question. If you have done a quiz on Brightspace, this will be very familiar to you. The options are very similar, if not actually exactly the same. When you go in, again, if you've done a quiz, you'll see this is very familiar. The difference, though, is for something like a multiple choice question, you're not going to be able to identify a correct answer because it's a survey rather than a quiz. Just like with the quiz too, if you select any of the fields, you'll see the editor here. So you can insert media, you can edit code or whatever you need to do here. And a tip, if you don't already do this, if you want to copy the formatting of the question, select this caret at the bottom and select Save and Copy. So I want to show another question option that you're less likely to use as a quiz and more likely to use as a survey, and that's a Likert question. So if I'm asking a Likert question, it'll give me the option to provide a title. So students cannot see that title. That title is for you. So maybe you want to add this question to a survey question bank. That is optional for you. What students will see is this introductory text. That will be the directions at the top of the question. So I'm going to go ahead and paste in my introductory text. When I scroll down to the questions, I see I have all these options. So I can ask my students to rank something on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 to 8, 1 to 10, or based on agreement, satisfaction, frequency. We can take a look at what some of these look like. I'll choose agreement because that was my prompt here. This is where I will add the statements that students will rank or state their agreement to. So I can add additional options here. I can also use the trash can if I only want 1. The default's going to bring me to 2. So I'll paste in some statements here. I found the Unit 1 review helpful, and I felt prepared for the Unit 1 exam. So when I hit preview, I can see what Brightspace gives me as an option. So it's going to fill in the text for me. Strongly disagree, disagree, neutral, agree, strongly agree. That's what the agreement scale text is. If maybe I knew that some students had not done the Unit 1 review, maybe it was an in-class activity and some of them weren't there, I can select the checkbox to include an NA option. And if you wanted, you could select another one of these options and preview To see what the top text is, we can see that NA appears there as well. Next, we'll jump to how to view results of a survey. There are two ways to view your results. When you go back into Manage Surveys, you'll see a caret beside your survey. The top three options will be for editing, hiding, or previewing, but the bottom two are how you view results. Statistics is probably the easiest way to view a survey result. When I select statistics, I can limit a date range. If not, it will show the entirety of when the survey was open. It tells me here that 5 attempts have been completed, and I can see a summary of results from all students in my class. So here were the results from a multiple choice question. I see the bar graph breakdown, and I see percentages here as well as the numbers. This was a Likert scale. In this case, I asked students to rank something on a scale of 1 to 5, and I clarified for them what I felt a 1 was and what I felt a 5 was. Again, it gives me that breakdown by a bar graph. It will color code it as well if something is much higher up than others. It gives me the numeric breakdown. So I know 4 people said ranked written instructions as a 5, and it gives me a percentage breakdown as well. You'll see here there was less agreement in these last two, so nothing was labeled as a green, but I can still see the numbers and I can still see the percentages. Question 3 was a written response question, and I have the option to expand the responses so I can read all of my students' answers in one convenient place. However, it doesn't tell me, how did this student respond to each of these questions? If you're looking for an individualized report, or if you want these results shown in a different way, you can generate a custom report. So to do that, we want to go back to Manage Surveys. We're going to go to Edit here. So if I were to click Reports, it would bring me to any of your reports that are already generated. If I have not generated a report, I'm going to go and need to set one up. So I'll go back to Edit. You can set this up in advance. I personally did it after the fact because I felt that that was more logical. So I'm going to click on Report Setup. I haven't set up any reports yet, so I'm going to go ahead and add one. I'm going to ask you to give it a name. For right now, I'm going to call it Report. There are two different types. One is a summary report and the other is individual attempts. So for the summary report, that's going to be very similar to the statistics that we just saw. The difference is that you can toggle on and off what you want to see. So if you did not want to see that aggregate data, you only wanted to see the text responses, you could choose that or vice versa. If you're not sure what is shown in either of these, it will tell you in this little question mark which types of questions it will summarize or show text responses for. The other option is individual reports. So you'll see here, I don't have the option to click this. And the reason for that is because my survey was anonymous, right? So the user information is already hidden. I can't be sneaky and say it's anonymous and then show user information. If I had done an identified survey, this would be clickable. So a use case for that would be maybe you want to share this survey report with students and you want to know who said what, but you don't want students to know who said what. You can still generate your own report later, but you could hide user information so students aren't seeing names in the report that's generated. You can choose to release it right away or after a date. So maybe if your survey doesn't close until a later date, that's what you might set here. And then you will need to select who you want to release the report to. So again, student is an option. One thing I will caution you about is that if you release the report to students, it doesn't send it to them. Students would still need to go to the survey, click the caret, go down to reports, find the report and click on it. And chances are they're not going to do that unless you explicitly tell them to. I personally think it is probably easier to just share the results some other way, either by just telling them or by showing them your screen, but it is an option if you want students to see everything to release the report to them. You'll definitely want to release it to yourself. Since this is my sandbox, I need to select leader as well. So if you were playing around and testing, remember in your sandbox, you were not an instructor. I had a funny moment where I ran a report for this sample survey and I was like, why can't I see it? Well, because I selected an instructor. I'm not an instructor. So I'll go ahead and hit save. And then I can see my report here. I'll hit save and close. So now when I go back to my caret and I select reports, now there is something there that I can look at. If I select this report, I have some options here regarding how I want to see it. So I can generate a CSV, an Excel sheet, or an HTML. HTML is going to look very similar to that summary, that statistics that we already saw. And I can choose a date range. I'm going to generate HTML because I like the way that looks. And here we can see a view very similar to statistics, but it's identified by individual users because that's what I asked for. If I had identified students and I had chosen not to hide their information, it would say names here. So that's how I could view each person's individual answer. But here I can see that, okay, this person said Wilmington, this person said 543, and the person who answered this gave these answers. And I can see the same type of view for each of my students in my class. So up at the top, I still have options. I can export this to a CSV, I can export it to an Excel sheet, or I can choose to print it if that is something that I would find helpful. And anyone who I have released this report to can do the same thing. Go into surveys, select the caret, and then view reports.